and welcome to this Festival of Ideas event hosted by the University of York. Thank you for joining us today from wherever you might be on the last day of this year's festival, celebrating 10 years of educating, entertaining and inspiring. I'm Dr. Anna McIntosh and I work at the University of York, where I manage one of the university's flagship initiatives, a £12 million programme investigating how to assure the safety of robotics, autonomous systems and artificial intelligence, something we do in partnership with the Lloyd's Register Foundation. So you can see I have a particular interest in the topic of today's talk, and I'm sure it will raise many questions from you. If you are joining us live, then you can ask questions using the Q&A button on your screen. This will be available throughout the event, so you can ask questions at any time, and I would encourage you to do so. The more questions, the better. If you have some technical problems, like your Wi-Fi cutting out, for example, you can rejoin the event using the original link. But in any case, today's event is being recorded, so you will be able to watch it again, and I'll let you have the details of that a little later on. If you need subtitles, you can turn these on and off using the CC Live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. But now that those formalities are dealt with, I'm delighted to introduce you to our guest speaker, Dr. Susan Schneider, a philosopher interested in the nature of the self and mind. Susan has spoken and written widely about the nature of life, the nature of persons, what minds have in common with programs, radical brain enhancement and superintelligence, and explores these topics not just from the perspective of a philosopher, but brings in aspects of cognitive science, artificial intelligence and astrobiology to her own thinking. Susan is the founding director of the Center for the Future Mind at Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, Florida, and the NASA Baruch Bloomberg Chair at the Library of Congress, where she previously also held a Distinguished Scholar Chair. She frequently appears on television shows, primarily in the USA, and has written for the New York Times, Scientific American, and the Financial Times. Susan published her most recent book, Artificial You, AI and the Future of the Mind, in October 2019, and I'm thrilled that she's joining us today to consider how artificial intelligence could change not just the world around us, but also the way we think about ourselves and others, whether they be humans or machines. So Susan, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Anna, for your kind introduction, and it's very nice to be here. I wish it had been in person, of course. Your festival just seems wonderful, but we'll do our best. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a thought experiment. So philosophers love thought experiments. They're really the laboratory of the mind. And this is from the very beginning of my book, Artificial You. So I'm actually reading you the first paragraph or so of the book. So it's 2045. Today you're out shopping. Your first stop is the Center for Mind Design. As you walk in, a large menu stands before you. It lists brain enhancements with funky names. So on the menu are enhancements like Hive Mind, which is a brain chip allowing you to experience the innermost thoughts of your loved ones. I don't know if I want that. Zen Garden is a microchip for Zen master level meditative states. That sounds good. Human Calculate, another good one, gives you savant level mathematical abilities. So what would you select, if anything? Enhanced attention, Mozart level musical abilities. You can order a single enhancement or even a bundle of several. Okay. So that's how the book begins. And so today is going to be about the future of the mind. We're going to explore how our understanding of ourselves, our minds, and our nature can actually shape the future itself, for better or for worse. So today, at a place like the Center for Mind Design, I want to know, could you truly merge at AI with AI? So that's what we'll look at today. If there was such a place, and if the enhancements were medically feasible, would you really merge with artificial intelligence? Is that what you'd be doing when you added those kinds of chips to your head? Here's a roadmap. So first, I'm going to introduce some background issues just to bring you up to speed. For example, I'll talk about a movement called transhumanism. I'll talk about current neurotechnologies under development. And then as a philosopher, I'll bring it back to the age-old philosophical questions about ourself and the nature of the mind that I think are raised by these issues. Then in part two, I will say to you that I suspect there are what I call design ceilings. And these are ceilings on intelligence augmentation, sadly, that arise, or at least may arise, in the domains of conscious experience and the nature of the self or person. And then I'll close talking about my work a bit as NASA chair over at NASA with a discussion of the big picture, our place in the universe, and the road ahead, the future of intelligence throughout the universe. Okay, so let's turn to the background issues. So as you know, the brain's evolution was highly constrained. I mean, there were lots of environmental, anatomical, and metabolic demands on us. And, you know, the skull is only so large. We have intense energy needs. We evolved to be predators, and so on. So AI-based brain enhancement technologies could actually, in principle at least, augment intelligence in a way that is quicker, much quicker than biological evolution. We see this already in the domain of evolution of artificial intelligence over the last 10 years, which has been quite amazing. Well, I call this new enterprise mind design. It's a type of intelligent design, believe it or not. But we, not some god, purport to be the designers. This is something that Richard Dawkins himself pointed out in a film we were both in called Super Sapiens. Well, frankly, I find the prospect of mind design humbling because we humans were not terribly evolved. We walk the moon, we harness the energy of the atom, yet racism, greed, and violence are still very commonplace. Our social development lags behind our technological prowess in a lot of tech domains. So I believe we need to start thinking about radical brain enhancement today. Well, let's go back to this hypothetical idea of a center for mind design. And suppose you're standing in line and there's a giant menu in front of you. So it's like a kind of coffee house. And there are all these funky names, like I said in the introduction. Now, suppose as you wait in line, an employee there comes up to you and she says to you, guess what? I got to give you a little heads up. In a few weeks, we'll learn if these clinical trials go as planned. If they do, you'll eventually have the ability to purchase an enhancement bundle that we'll call Merge. It's a series of enhancements that gradually allows you to augment and then transfer all of your mental functions to the cloud over a period of 5 years. So in a way, you could avoid death if everything went right, because you would literally be on the cloud. You know, you could still be connected to your body. Perhaps there's some sort of ultra fast wireless connectivity, or maybe you'll choose to download into a robot body. But in any case, you might see it as a technophile's route to immortality. Well, could you do this? Could you merge with artificial intelligence in this way? That's what I want to ask in today's talk. So before I answer, as a philosopher, I have some preliminary concerns that I want to bring up. You know, philosophers look at language a lot, and, you know, I just want to ask, what do we even mean when we talk about merging with artificial intelligence? And further, you know, philosophers tend to be very skeptical. So I want to ask, isn't a merger too speculative to even concern oneself with? I mean, this seems highly futuristic. So why even talk about it? Well, let me first discuss this idea of merging with AI. So transhumanists say that humans can overcome their biological limitations through science and technology. And it's an exciting social movement. I was a transhumanist when I was in high school, when I first started, reading about it. And there are members of the Center for Future Mind, which is a center which I recently started, who are famous transhumanists, like Natasha Vita-Moore, one of the founders. And so engaging with these ideas is very important to me. But in any case, they offer a kind of trajectory for the enhancement of the brain and the augmentation of the human body. And here I'm just caricaturing their view because I am talking about a view held by lots of people, and there's certainly exceptions. But the idea is that you start with 21st century unenhanced humans like us, or maybe our children, because maybe it's a little too early to think that we'll actually do this. But these individuals have significant upgrading with cognitive and other physical enhancements. And over time, maybe they make multiple trips to this hypothetical center for mind design. They become posthumans. That means that they're no longer technically human. And then they become super intelligent. So you might have heard this expression before. A super intelligent AI is an artificial intelligence that by definition is smarter than humans in every way possible. Well, the idea is then that we would eventually become one with super intelligence, whether it be participation in a larger kind of intelligence or be a sort of instantiation of a very, very smart artificial intelligence system ourselves, created by all of these uploads and upgrades that we selected over time. This view has become very, very popular. So for example, you hear these kinds of views with people like Elon Musk, Nick Bostrom in his interesting book, Superintelligence, Natasha Vita-Moore, my colleague, Ray Kurzweil, whose books I found very intriguing when I first became a transhumanist myself, and Stephen Hawking, the late Stephen Hawking was a transhumanist. Now, what I want to call your attention to is that today's a short talk. So I'm not really going to talk about biologically based enhancements. I'm not going to talk about gene editing techniques and any of this. I'm going to focus instead on the idea of upgrading your intelligence through the use of brain chips. And in fact, invasively replacing parts of the human brain with AI components. This is, of course, speculative. However, I want to mention to you that transhumanism is already a very influential perspective of the nature of the mind. I hear it constantly with the science media. I work in Washington with Congress. I hear it from, members of Congress. I hear it from business leaders. It's very influential. And I think it's important that we get a clear conception of the future of the mind. Well, this is also interesting philosophically because it's a classic philosophical issue. And the question here is, does consciousness transcend the brain? Which of course is an age-old question, which we ask in the context of religion and the soul. And here we're asking it in a technological guise, which is really interesting. And I actually think, and I talk about this in the book, that there are ways of testing this hypothesis that consciousness could transcend the brain in this technological guise in terms of tests for machine consciousness. But I won't be able to talk about that today, but that's in the first half of my book, Artificial You. I also think the issue is important from the perspective of cognitive science, because if you talk to people in cognitive science, there's a sort of research paradigm that says that the mind is something like a software program. And I think this issue touches on that one in ways that I talk about in the closing chapter of my book. Finally, the issue is important also because we shouldn't commit what the historian Michael Best calls the Jetsons fallacy. So what I mean by this is, if you think about cartoons like the Jetsons, or if you think about the famous film Star Wars, the AIs are all around the people. I mean, there are these great robots like C-3PO, but the humans or the humanoids themselves are depicted as unenhanced. And in reality, that's probably not how the future will work. In reality, our intelligence will be augmented in all kinds of ways, and we may in fact be more synthetic than natural, although, you know, those expressions are terminologically laden issues, which I won't go into in this talk. Okay, so let me talk about some tech trends. So Elon Musk has recently said that humans can keep up with artificial intelligence by, quote, having sort of some sort of merger of biological intelligence and machine intelligence. To this end, he founded a company called Neuralink, which has as its goal the creation of an eventual implantable chip allowing data from the brain to travel wirelessly to your digital devices. And I just want to mention that this chip is in the skull itself. So he's not going as far as talking about removing parts of the brain, which is good. But anyway, you might want to look into this if you're interested. Like recently he did it with pigs with some success, and then moved up to primates. And I believe human clinical trials are next. There's also the artificial hippocampus, which is far along. It's in phase 2 clinical trials in the United States. So they're using it in humans. It is there to simulate the functioning of the hippocampus in coarse grain, so that people with terrible memory problems are able to lay down new memories. So this is exciting. And there's also work over at the U.S. Defense Department on the on brain chips, and at Facebook, Google's working on related issues, and the company Kernel. So there's a lot of work on this. People just don't realize. But I want to now explore the issue of design ceilings. I want to explore consciousness and personhood in particular. And one thing I just want to emphasize before we go into this is that in that last slide, I talked about both enhancements and therapies. So, for example, the idea to make a brain chip as commonplace as LASIK implies the widespread use of chips to augment intelligence or give us some sort of wireless connection to the internet. And that's an enhancement. On the other hand, if you're talking about helping someone with a radical memory loss problem, that's a therapy. Now, I don't think the boundary between enhancement and therapy is all that clear, but I just want to call your attention to the different contexts in which somebody would turn to these kinds of technologies. Okay, so now I want to discuss design ceilings. So these are what I call limitations on human intelligence augmentation that are not actually imposed by evolution or even biotech. They're actually philosophical in nature, believe it or not. Now, of course, neurotechnology will impose limits as well, and I'm really interested in these issues, and I have colleagues in Florida working on this. But as a philosopher, I'm concerned about what this all means and where it's all headed, because after all, just because we can do something technologically doesn't mean that we should do it. We need to think about the nature of the mind and the future of the self here. Well, in particular, I am concerned with what I call a consciousness ceiling. And this would arise only if microchips fail to underlie conscious experience. I'm also concerned with something that I call the self ceiling. And this is a point beyond which the person who attempts to enhance is no longer the same individual they were before, because the procedure causes that individual who sought enhancement to actually stop existing. Okay. So if that was the case, if you went to the Center for Mind Design, in the US, there's a commercial about the Roach Motel. It's like to kill cockroaches, and it's a little box, and the roaches go in and they don't go out. So it'd be like the Roach Motel. You check in, you don't check out. Okay, so now let me turn to the consciousness ceiling. Just one second. Okay, good. Just checking in to make sure there weren't any emergency emails about my presentation. Okay, so the consciousness ceiling is the following. So when you see the rich hues of a sunset or you smell the aroma of your morning coffee, notice that it feels like something to be you. This reminds me of coffee. Consciousness is that felt quality of experience. Okay. So whenever you're awake and even when you're dreaming, it feels like something to be you from the inside. That is consciousness, not to be confused with having a conscience. That's different. So the example I like to use is a serial killer is conscious, but they don't have a conscience. Okay. Well, Richard Dawkins recently said, it's not obvious to me that a replacement of our species by our own technological creations would really be a bad thing. Is that right? Well, it's not so clear at all. I mean, it depends on what replaces us. Hello. So, for example, if non-conscious machines supplanted biological intelligence, or at least human intelligence, then the singularity would actually be a nightmare. It would be the end of consciousness on Earth, at least in humans. That wouldn't be a good thing, having a bunch of non-conscious computers on the planet without human life. Doesn't strike me as exciting. I mean, we would lose the thing that matters the most to us, our consciousness. So this leads me to articulate what I call a consciousness ceiling. So what if you did bi-merge? So if AI is not conscious, then merging would obviously be a really bad idea. So if microchips were the wrong stuff to underlie conscious experience, then a mind-machine merger really couldn't happen at all. If you tried, you would actually lose consciousness, and then, arguably your mind wouldn't exist anymore if you were just what philosophers call a zombie, having no felt quality at all to your experience. You would have hit a big time enhancement wall, right? I mean, there'd be no one who would want to augment unless they did it for altruistic reasons. Maybe they wanted to become a super intelligence to keep up with AI and save humanity, to help with the problem of how to control, artificial intelligence that outsmarts us. I mean, that would be like a very kind person, but we in general wouldn't want to walk into a mind design center. Those centers would, if all they did was try to merge us with AI, it would be a science fiction dystopia. Okay, that being said, I want to now turn to the self ceiling. So suppose that the consciousness ceiling does not arise. Okay. Well, should you then bi-merge? Is it okay? Can you go to the Center for Mind Design and just order up a bundle of enhancements and even bi-merge the big enhancement that allows you to transfer consciousness to the cloud? Well, let me just suggest that you think about it more. I know that it would be perhaps digital immortality. You would be living much longer, maybe even till the heat death of the universe. It's not technically immortality, but it's pretty amazing. But in order to understand whether you should enhance, you should really think about what you are to begin with. What is it to be a person in the first place? What is a self? And would you actually continue to exist? Or if you change yourself in such radical ways, would you replace yourself by someone or something else? Well, this gets into issues in the field of metaphysics. So think about the metaphysics of everyday objects. Think about, for example, your espresso machine. And think about how certain things, you can identify features of those things that if they cease to exist, the thing itself ceases to exist. So suppose you go to your favorite cafe and you're talking to the barista, she's a philosophy major, and you're having a conversation about the nature of things. She's telling you about her metaphysics class. And so she's like, I wonder if I broke the machine, would it cease to exist? And you're like, no, you just would need to fix it. It wouldn't cease to exist. Well, what if I took out a science fiction ray gun and I just decimated the thing so it's just ash? Yes, then it would cease to exist. You would have destroyed it. It wouldn't exist any longer. Okay, so the upshot, certain features are essential to objects' natures. Well, it's like that with people. And the question in the literature in philosophy about the nature of the person is asking what features, if any, are essential to a person really continuing on and existing throughout their life, and what features are not. So there are all kinds of candidate features. I'll talk about this in a second, but let me just focus on my main point, which is this. Even if enhancement brings superintelligence, it had better not involve the elimination of any of your essential properties. Because in that case, you would have gone in to the Center for the Future Mind, the Center for Mind Design, got your enhancements, and you would cease to exist. So it'd be like the Roach Motel, if you will. So even if the technology works, you wouldn't have merged with AI. The sharper mind or the fitter body, it would be experienced by someone or something else. That being maybe conscious. Remember, we were focusing on a scenario in which machines could be conscious, but it wouldn't be the same as you. It wouldn't be you. Okay, this leads me to articulate the ceiling I have in mind here, which I call the self-ceiling. This is a point beyond which the person who attempts to enhance is actually no longer the same individual they were before, because the procedure actually causes that individual who sought enhancement to cease to exist. Okay, what are we then? That would be a logical next question to ask. Well, there's so many different theories. So let me just go through some leading theories. So brain-based materialism is a biggie. On this view, you are essentially your brain and nervous system and perhaps elements of your body. Now, on this view, it's not at all clear that you could merge. I'll explain that in a minute. The psychological continuity view is a very well-known view associated with philosophers like Locke, and it holds that you are your overall psychological configuration, your memories, perhaps your conscious experience and whatnot, and there needs to be some sort of important continuity of memory from your previous self to your current self that makes you you. Now, there are lots of different versions of this view, so I'm being very generic. But let me just mention that one important version is one held by many transhumanists, actually. And that view I call patternism. That's an expression I believe Ray Kurzweil coined in relation to this view. And it says that what is essential to you is your computational configuration. So you might think of the computations underlying the sensory subsystems and systems in the brain, like early vision, the association areas that integrate basic sensory subsystems, the neural circuitry that makes up your domain general reasoning, your attention, your memories, and so on. These all form a sort of Uber algorithm, if you will, that your brain computes, and you are the algorithm. So you're not the instantiation, you're not the physical brain and body, you are that algorithm that the brain computes, and some sort of pattern of change of that algorithm. There's also a soul theory, which of course is incredibly influential. Again, just a caricature here, but on this view, your essence is your soul or your immaterial mind, understood as distinct from your physical body. Another important view is associated with the Buddha and the philosopher Derek Parfit, as well as the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. And this view is that the self is an illusion. So there are just bundles of impressions. There's no underlying self there, according to Hume, for example. And there's no survival because there's no person or self anyway. So that's something that the Buddha and Parfit, apparently claimed. And, Nietzsche puts it well, as usual. He says, the I is a grammatical fiction. Well, could you merge with artificial intelligence? Let's go back to these views. Well, this is where things get really depressing because, I'd love to go to the Center for Mind Design and really tune up the brain. I guess if I went too far, I'd be a little worried for the following reasons. Well, suppose you are a brain-based materialist, okay? Or even just that you think your earthly survival depends on your brain and nervous system. Well, you can't change substrates in that case. You die if you tried. If you replace too much of your biological brain, at some point, you would die. I call that brain drain. And you don't know at what point either. That's the awful part. So this changes the picture of what we should do with respect to brain augmentation. Neurotechnology should develop biological brain enhancements instead, and minimal AI-based enhancements that don't replace or damage key parts of the brain, okay? So maybe something like an intellectual exoskeleton that you put on at the beginning of the day and take off at the end, but steer clear of actually scooping out parts of the biological brain and replacing it. Okay, what about soul theory? Well, that decision really depends on your particular religion. And it depends on whether, in the context of that religion, you have a justification for believing that your enhanced body would still be correlated with your soul or immaterial mind. So ask your religious advisor. The no self view says something really interesting. It says that you don't merge with AI at all because there's no you. So there's no survival anyway. So you might strive to enhance, though. You might, in an act of, wanting to create a future consciousness that's somehow better, you might opt to remove parts of your brain and replace them with chips because you don't believe in survival at all. But there's no merging with the AI. There's no future you. So patternism. Now, remember, this was the view that the transhumanist often adopts. So one problem that emerges with this view is we don't even know when a pattern continues or ends. So maybe deleting a few bad chess playing habits is kosher, but what about more serious mind sculpting endeavors, like adding several brain chips that give you new cognitive abilities? It's really not clear if you could merge at all, even according to the transhumanist favorite view. Ugh. So this leads me to take a stance of metaphysical humility. That's what I call it in the book. Claims about survival that involve someone transferring their mind to a new substrate and making drastic alterations to the brain should be carefully scrutinized, as I wrote in both Financial Times op-eds and New York Times op-eds. Bear in mind that there's intense disagreement in the philosophical literature. We all need to be very humble because I don't think there's a decisive view here. I don't think you can prove that there's a soul. I don't think you can prove that there's not a self. I don't think any of these views are, slam dunk views when it comes to looking at them from the standpoint of analysis. And I think we need to bear that in mind because these kinds of enhancements are life and death decisions. So you can't just go, oh, I'm a no self theorist, so why not? It's your life. It's not just getting things into the context of a journal article on the topic or handing in an undergraduate philosophy paper. So even enhancements that actually just involve replacing parts of the brain without enhancing at all the cognitive abilities or perceptual abilities, so just replacing for the sake of longevity, those are actually risky too, because the brain might be essential to the self. Okay. A safer approach would be a limited integration with AI if you really want to augment your intelligence or live longer through use of AI technology. So you should instead think of removable devices and biological enhancements, maybe using nanotechnology and some AI capacities, or implants that don't remove existing brain tissue. Okay. So my job as a philosopher is not to be skeptical so much that the technologies will be developed. I'm open to that possibility. And I find it very exciting in the context of brain therapies. But I want to inform the public of the risks and help people to understand that how we feel about the nature of the mind is extremely important. And further, as we move into the future, having an informed conception of these issues and doing some philosophy to understand them is important. Okay, so this leads me to conclude with the discussion of the big picture. So here I get to talk about the fun I had when I was working with NASA for, I guess, a total of 3 years on this project about the future of intelligence. So, and then, I got to be the NASA chair based on that work last year. Sadly, the chair ends, you only get it for a year. So anyway, it made me reflect very deeply on the future of life. So right now, many people in astrobiology and astrophysics suspect that there's life out there on other planets. And there's been the identification of a number of exoplanets that are said to be Earth-like in all kinds of respects, and that may be inhabited. We don't know if they are. We call them habitable in the sense that in principle, it seems like there would be life there, but of course we haven't discovered concretely life on other planets yet. Well, if there is life out there, maybe some of it did survive its technological age. I mean, maybe some of it went beyond just being microbial life. I mean, there are all kinds of steps to get to the point where there's a technological civilization. But on the assumption that there's lots of life out there, and also noticing just the sort of commonly accepted fact in astrophysics that Earth is a relatively young planet, there may very well be civilizations out there that are at least 50,000 years older than us. They would have hit their own singularities. Boy, they probably turned on their own synthetic intelligences. It'd be interesting to see what kinds of computers they had. And they probably augmented their own brains. So my guess is that the smartest civilizations out there, they're not biological intelligences anymore. They're highly synthetic. And I think that's really interesting because it means that when we're asking the kind of questions about design ceilings that I asked today, about whether there will be a consciousness ceiling and about the self ceiling, we're not just asking questions about Earth. We're asking questions about the evolution of consciousness and the evolution of intelligence throughout the universe. And it could be that the greatest intelligences are no longer conscious. Consciousness was like a momentary blip or flowering at one point in the evolution of intelligence on a planet, and then it went beyond it. And that suggests that there's something very exceptional or special about the kind of life here on Earth and biological life in general. It also says to us that we may have some important questions that we need to answer in order to understand how we should augment our own intelligence if we do that. And as we create AI, I think we have to ask questions about, do we want to design consciousness in for the future of artificial intelligences? Can we seed consciousness? Okay, so now you get the big picture, and thanks for bearing with me. So the takeaways today: metaphysical humility. Carl Sagan, in Contact, his character was an alien and had met Jodie Foster's character, the human, for the first time. And that character says, "You're an interesting species, an interesting mix. You're capable of such beautiful dreams and such horrible nightmares." So let's get it right. Technological prowess, that's not enough. To flourish, we need to appreciate the philosophical issues that lie beneath the algorithms. Okay, thank you for your time. Are there any questions?
Susan, thank you so much. That's been fascinating. And as a reminder to our audience, you can use the Q&A button to ask Susan some questions during this section. You've spoken a little bit about the idea of altering the human mind, and I'd like to start there, if I may. You mentioned the need to ensure that enhancements weren't taking away from the person's self, and I have to agree, that sounds important to me. When developing the enhancements at the Centre for Mind Design, one of our audience members was wondering what legislations you could anticipate to protect both the users and others. I mean, would there be standards? Would there be a new version of Interpol to run background checks on me before I could have a brain enhancement?
Yeah, well, God, I hope not. I mean, gee, I never thought of background checks. That's pretty funny because I suppose in a way, any super intelligence could be weaponized. And so we may not want, say, to upgrade a sociopath. That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of that. What I've been saying is, just like in the United States, we have the Food and Drug Administration. And so any of these microchip technologies would have to pass through them. And that's no party. So not only would they have to, these technologies would have to work and not be dangerous, but I think, and you know, I intend to shout this from the rooftops. You know, these augmentation technologies need to be safe from a privacy, cybersecurity standpoint, and also the public needs to be actually made aware. So if my view is, if you want to go to the Center for Mind Design, then you should have something like the equivalent of genetic counseling when you want a gene test. And you should actually have to sit down and discuss the issues that I talked about. So I'm not just trying to get jobs for my grad students, really. No, I really think that, you know, I had genetic tests done once and it was so useful. They were like, you know, that you in the United States, you won't be able to get life insurance if it comes out positive and all this stuff. So I think it is important that you understand the deep repercussions and actually mull over the philosophical details of these issues.
Sure, I mean, that sounds like a really interesting way to think about that, having this as a as a regulated modification like a drug, but also thinking a bit more about the impact on your future life. And I guess that ties into something else one of our other audience members said, who I note is not yet on board with mind enhancements, I have to tell you. They ask how different you think the experience of AI enhancements would be compared to the changes that have already happened to you as a natural function of aging. So those you have no control over. We're very different now to our infant selves. Do you think that's just another step that you could go through in life, or is it more than that?
Yeah, that I think is one of the deepest questions here. So, you know, if you get really into this literature on the nature of the self, the first thing you say to yourself is, oh my God, I mean, my brain changed so much from infancy until now. How many points did I actually die? I mean, I didn't die, my previous self did. And then I became a new self. And I mean, I don't know how to answer that. I take that stance of metaphysical humility, right? I mean, maybe there is something special about our biological incarnation that allows us to persist over time, or maybe there's something like a soul. I mean, or maybe there's even a physical law in the universe about these issues that philosophers will sort of uncover somehow. I mean, you know, when you think about like the debate on consciousness, there's some claims by people like David Chalmers that consciousness itself is a sort of physical property of the universe, a physical law. What goes beyond, it goes beyond physics, of course, but it is a fundamental feature of the universe. That's what I mean. Sorry. And maybe the persistence of the self would be a fundamental feature too. So anyway, I think what we have to do is be super careful and really think hard. And think that it might have already happened to us in other contexts, but do we want it to happen again?
And do we want it to happen to us in a specific direction, perhaps? So if we're choosing the direction, then we have perhaps more say over our future than we do over our past changes.
Yeah, it has to be done reflectively. I mean, it may be that somebody opts for slow enhancements so that it looks more like the ordinary evolution of the self over time. I certainly would do it that way. I would also do biologically based enhancements. I would try to keep things just developments of the biological brain. I would be particularly worried about overnight changes and changes from one substrate to the next. I think we already have examples, real world examples of overnight changes and how they change the self. I have a friend who's acquired savant. So she fell down a ravine and hit her head, and she lost almost all memories of her past.
Wow.
And she's a savant now, and she's entirely different than she was before. She reads string theory. She reads the literature on the nature of the self. She has an extensive portfolio of artworks to the point where her art is sold in fancy galleries in Los Angeles. She's entirely different. She was a chicken farmer who didn't even pass first grade. She had to stay back. So she doesn't think she's the same person. She thinks she died when that earlier self died.
That's fascinating.
So,
I mean,
it is. Her case is fascinating. It's also fascinating for me personally because I grew up with her.
So actually, I think this leads on really nicely to another question which we've had, which is, in that instance, that's been a whole change of personality, which has been sudden and accidental. But if you're looking at sudden changes to personality which are optional, are we not working then in favor of the people who can afford those changes?
Oh, yeah.
Is that not changing the way society is currently set up? And
oh, yeah. Yeah. Now, I have a whole talk on this topic too. And I wrote a piece in 1.0 with Evan Salinger on this topic. I mean, this is a whole can of worms too, right? So one thing that, an advisor to Obama said to me when I gave a talk on some of these issues at the Woodrow Wilson School, to the nuke specialists, they were great. So it would change society if in the United States, we look at all the social divisiveness we have right now. I mean, unenhanced people, we don't get along, right? And things are a little crazy, or at least they were pretty crazy in the US. So if we only augment a handful of people, I mean, what's going to happen with the rich poor gap? I mean, what does that mean? Like, would, the tech CEOs be the first ones to be vastly smarter than us? So they'd be super intelligent. I mean, why isn't that considered a danger? I mean, in the super intelligence literature, everybody's worried about what's called the control problem. Okay. And furthermore, what if it was just available to the rich? Then we would have, what kind of democracy would we have? I mean, how would it stay together? That's what the advisor to Obama pointed out, with the social divisions that would come from not just different ways of thinking, different religious views, different views about gender or whatever, but this would be entirely different levels of intelligence. So I do think we have to think through the whole process from a regulatory and social standpoint, as well as from a philosophical standpoint. And none of what I just said requires AI augmentation. It could be other forms. So it could be through gene editing technologies. So these are the kinds of things that we definitely have to think about.
And do you think that it's inevitable that AI will go in this direction? Do you think that
AI will go inside the head?
No. We'll head towards these kinds of uses of AI for personal changes?
I think we're trying. Mm-hmm. I think that there's already a lot of development in these directions. I think that wearables are definitely going to happen. Will it go inside the brain? I suspect it will. I can't say 100% that it will. There could be other forms of intelligence augmentation that people turn to. But AI is not out of the picture anyway, because like AI would be behind a lot of these technologies as well. identifying routes to make us more and more intelligent. I mean, I do think AI will outsmart us. And if it works for us, then it will help augment our intelligence. Now, whether that augmentation is through nanobots, through radical brain chips that actually replace parts of the biological brain, a combination of both. I mean, maybe the chips will get so smarter that we just inject them in to the body, you know, and the nanobot swarm does its thing. I mean, there are so many scenarios out there, or maybe it's just done through clever gene editing of future, you know, maybe we have designer babies. I mean, these are all perhaps ways that could get us to a situation where the same kind of ethical issues arise.
So I guess the question that we've been asked here is also whether you feel that there's any major difference between technological enhancements like these ones and medical enhancements. So taking a medicine might profoundly alter your state of mind for the better or perhaps for the worse. Should we be even considering technology differently to that? Or, as you say, having an equivalent to the FDA, is it just the same?
Oh, that's great. Yes. So think about the drug Prozac. I mean, people were asking these kinds of questions in the context of Prozac because it was such a transformative drug for so many people that people were wondering if it was too radical of an alteration in who they are. Now, I personally think that these psychiatric drugs, if they work, can be transformative in really important ways. They're therapeutic, which is different than optional alterations in oneself, right? So, I mean, there's a different kind of internal debate there. And I also think that changing your neurochemistry in certain ways is not as radical as a shift as putting a chip in your head at the Center for Mind Design, or trying to actually merge with artificial intelligence. And so the question here is a matter of degree, right? And I can't tell you what the self is. I can't. And I'm a philosopher. I can tell you that there's intense debates and that nobody's given a convincing case. That's what I think. I think if I teach the issue, you know, I used to teach introduction to philosophy and had the pleasure of teaching this issue for many, many years. And I can tell you right now, no two philosophers agree, and there's no uncontroversial winner. There are plenty of people who believe in the soul based on faith. And maybe people will move, you know, in a religious direction with this issue, and it should be their choice, right? That's what I want to articulate. I care more about the reality of pluralism. So we have a pluralistic society, and what we have to do is decide on legislation and education to give people the opportunity to make informed, educated decisions for themselves.
I can see that.
Yeah. What else can we do? I mean, it could be extremely exciting. Let's just hope everything goes well. I mean, the artificial hippocampus, for example, it's so amazing. I mean, there are people who have lost almost all functioning in their hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that lays down new memory. And the fact that there's a chip already, you know, under development and in human clinical trials at Ted Berger's lab is really exciting.
It is. I mean, it's fabulous. And I'm going to just wrap up with just one final question, which has come in, which I think I'd really like to know what your thoughts are on this. Right at the beginning of the introduction of your book, you say our social development lags behind our technological prowess. And it's something you said at the beginning of your talk. One of the members of our audience asked, will it be possible to enhance our social development as well through brain augmentation?
It's possible. I mean, I think it could make us, we could also enhance our reasoning. You know, I have all sorts of ideas, but they're just ideas and optional ideas. Like I don't believe that we should legislate chips. I think that would be scary and dystopian. I worry about China, actually. So, you know, we might just simply increase the levels of the social bonding hormones. And that's not even through a chip. But other things we might do is we might correct biases in our reasoning that involve racist beliefs like inside the tribe tendencies that people have. We might make ourselves better utilitarian reasoners. So, I mean, if you believe in a principle like the greatest good for the greatest number, you know, which a lot of philosophers in the ethics area are interested in utilitarianism. You know, if you really believe that, we're not very good utilitarians. We prioritize the lives of our friends and family well beyond the lives of strangers. And from a purely utilitarian standpoint, you know, it's not really rational to do that. And so we might change ourselves in ways that we personally find better. It would transform us. I mean, that alone would, I think, transform who we are in fundamental ways, which indicates how pressing these issues are about our own intellectual development as we move into a future where we can augment ourselves and our ethical development.
And Susan, I think that's the perfect point to end the talk. So thank you so much for sharing your work and your thoughts with us. We've gone from where we started as humans. We've thought about prejudices, technology, aliens even in and I can sense in our audience a mixture of excitement and apprehension about what the future holds for humanity. So I'd really like to thank you for sharing your work with us. Now, for the rest of our audience, in case you'd like to watch this talk again, or if you'd like to share it with someone, I know I will be doing, then this will be available on the festival YouTube channel, which can be accessed from the Watch Again section of the festival website after today, which we'll contact you about by email. Susan, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed reading your book. Susan's book, Artificial You, will be available from also our partner bookseller, Fox Lane Books. And you can see the festival website or head directly to foxlanebooks.co.uk/festival-of-ideas. And we really hope that you, the audience, will continue to be engaged with the York Festival of Ideas. It is the last day today of this year's, but we will certainly be back next year with more. And please check out the website yorkfestivalofideas.com for more details of future events. We've been thrilled to have you here, Susan, with us, and we really look forward to in person in the future.
It was great. And thank you to the members of the audience. And seems like a wonderful festival. So maybe we could do something in person one day.
That would be wonderful. Thank you very much for your questions. And I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but I really hope that you've enjoyed the talk as much as I have today. Thank you very much, Susan.
Bye, everybody.